I had no interest in becoming an entrepreneur at this stage of my career. I wanted to go to business school to essentially get paid well to work hard. I've never worked harder to get paid less. I started my career in finance, worked at a startup. I started a nonprofit. I was going to business school essentially to work in venture capital. And I wanted to go to the top schools. I paid for the GMAT tutors and consultants. I took the GMAT 7 times. And after killing myself trying to get into these top schools and doing all that work, I essentially took a trip to Montana. 4 nights at a crappy Airbnb in Montana was half my rent for the month in LA. That's really where I started to think there's got to be an alternative to this, right? It can't be that Airbnbs are now more expensive than hotels as a guest. And it can't also be that my most expensive asset, my home that I'm renting in LA, has to sit empty and unused because I'm a renter. Storm.
Guys, we got another episode of the One Network here. I got Bo Abrams with me. He's an entrepreneur in LA working on a very interesting company in the sort of real estate sector called Kommu, which I'm excited to hear about, just how he's marketing that and the whole concept behind that, because I know we got a lot of people in Proptech and stuff like that. But Bo, just before we get started, how did you get into entrepreneurship? What's your backstory for our sort of business audience here?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Chris. I think many people, have sort of stumbled into entrepreneurship. I had no interest in becoming an entrepreneur at this stage of my career. I wanted to go to business school to essentially get paid well to work hard. I've never worked harder to get paid less. That being said, I started my career in finance. I worked at a startup. I started a nonprofit. I was going to business school essentially to work in venture capital. And I wanted to go to the top schools. I paid for the GMAT tutors and consultants. I took the GMAT 7 times. And I was supposed to go to another school back east. COVID hit, didn't want to leave my family in LA, stuck around at UCLA. Same thing with my co-founder, also an LA local. And after killing myself trying to get, into these top schools and doing all that work, I essentially took a trip to Montana. 4 nights at a crappy Airbnb in Montana was half my rent for the month in LA. That's really where I started to think there's got to be an alternative to this, right? It can't be that Airbnbs are now more expensive than hotels as a guest. And it can't also be that my most expensive asset, my home that I'm renting in LA, has to sit empty and unused because I'm a renter. So initially, when I go to business school, I meet my buddy Gus, who's now my co-founder, and we're talking about this. We're saying, hey, we're technically in business school to also travel and do, fun things. That's a little secret of also why you want to go to business school. But we're like, why is it that we had to go to business school to travel if we both had remote jobs before the pandemic, did that for 100 million people? And it was really because we realized we had the same problem. We couldn't afford it for that 2 cost problem that I just described. And so we started doing some research. We found this one company doing relatively well, homeexchange.com. It's a home swapping platform, but it was targeting the wrong demo. And initially, that is essentially where we went down this path and this rabbit hole that led to what Kommu is today, which is fundamentally different than that initial model.
Interesting. Cool. So, going even farther back, did you always sort of think about starting a company, or did you have that kind of lemonade stand? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Entrepreneurial gene.
That's the funniest thing is that I don't have that lemonade stand entrepreneurial gene. Like I was never out hustling, slinging, cards and things to try to make a buck. I think I'm naturally very, for better or for worse, philanthropic in nature. And so I even starting that nonprofit was just more about taking action and initiative more than anything else, and saying, if I see a problem that I think fundamentally needs to be addressed, I'm going to go do everything I can to address it, whether it makes money or not. But yeah, my parents are entrepreneurs at heart. In the broader scheme of things, right? Doing anything on your own and to make money to provide for your family is being an entrepreneur. So my dad is an insurance broker. We're actually in his office right now. So this office that with weird shit behind me, he's had since I was born. It's like a red controlled little shack, but he's selling insurance in there. And my mom is an interior designer. And so I always wanted to work for myself. I always wanted financial freedom, but that was not why I went to business school. I wanted to get some more experience and then figure that out.
Interesting. So do you feel like the business school kind of it set you up? And when I was in Penn, it was in like an entrepreneurial program before I started my first company undergrad, but ended up being in a program with a lot of people who were MBAs and at Wharton, and they went on to found great companies. Did that kind of like stir? Did you sort of think? Did that like stir your thinking? I guess as far as the current company.
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, I think you nailed it on the head. Like Penn is a great example of you're literally an undergrad taking classes with business school students. And, when you're 19 to 21 years old, you can go conquer the world and build great companies. When you start applying to business school, typically it's that you're dead inside. You've worked a little bit. You realize that you want something else. And, business school applicants are very risk averse, right? That is just natural. So actually, a lot of VCs and a lot of entrepreneurs kind of shy away from, I would say, wanting to even associate with the MBA label because of that. But it gave me 2 years of time to sort of figure out what I wanted to do, to meet great people like my co-founder that were ultimately at the same stage of life as I was. And it did create, a structure that I didn't really love at UCLA, if I'm being honest. We had to do a lot of business plans, 7 business plans before actually like learning to launch a product and see what's going on in the market. But that did force us to do deep research on the space and ultimately to, decide to take the leap.
Interesting. I mean, do you look at like what kind of competitors do you look at, or are there competitors to Kommu, or like how do you look at the
Yeah.
landscape? Is it mostly status quo?
Yeah. So it's actually, this is really how I look at it. Um, Ultimately, timing is the biggest predictor of startup success, more than team, more than market size, et cetera. And the pandemic fundamentally changed how we travel, and it created this opportunity. It really was that there was Airbnb and there were hotels, and then there were a bunch of emerging players trying to sort of disrupt Airbnb in different ways. Like you could think of the Wanders of the world or Avant Stays that were making it a better experience for group travel.
Okay.
But think of it like if demand unlocked, you have all these millennials and Gen Zers now that make up most travelers that can work anywhere and want to. That is what caused Airbnb prices to skyrocket, right? The greed took over. And now those are second and third homes, mostly listed as investment properties. And that means there's no place for people to list primary homes to recoup anything, whether that in Kommu's case is your sunk cost or your rent, swapping homes, which we have a home swappers group on Kommu, pet sitters and house sitters. Ultimately, we saw that opportunity. And then in this market at this moment in time in business school, we saw competitors emerging that were startups. To name a few, there's Kindred, there's My Place, Kiki. There's quite a few in the market that we know very, very well. We've been competing with them for a long time, and they know us. And they both, I will say 2 of them raised significant amounts of capital right before me and Gus graduated business school from some great funds. And that was kind of reassuring to me and Gus. We're like, oh, we think we could actually go get ahead of them on the product and go compete effectively. And it's good to have competition, like especially emerging competition. Now, there's a market that's forming right now. That being said, Gus and I graduated business school. The market takes the biggest dive in the last 15 years. And, instead of just folding up shop and saying, there's no way we're going to raise, there's no way we're going to do any of this, we just went forward and built it and became the top rated home sharing network in the App Store. And it kind of made us the founders we are. Nobody just handed us a check and said, go do this, go figure out if you can scale this thing. It was more like everybody was saying, even with those competitors in the market validated, there's no way you're going to win this. There's no way you're going to scale this. Every excuse in the book. So that for us was a big moment because we realized that's why we're entrepreneurs, is that we go forward and we just figure it out and we just go do it and solve problems for our users.
So you talked a little bit about the pivot that you sort of made in the company, like the first couple months just starting the company. What did that involve? Did you raise money? What were like the first few steps building this type of company?
The initial pivot really was more from, let's call it business school period, 2021, 2022 to modern day, really like post summer 2022. So initially we were a home swapping platform, like Kindred is, like Home Exchange is, and that was because we found that site, Home Exchange. We pivoted away from that model for 2 reasons. First, it was because there was a lot of issues with disintermediation and that we ultimately didn't think that that model scaled appropriately, right? It was to say, if you and I met on a home swapping model, Chris, like something like some exclusive high-end membership network, and we did a swap, once that trust is bridged, we're good. Like, we're going to disintermediate and we're going to go direct from here on out because we trust each other. So that was one issue we encountered, because when we were testing for that, our company swapped, that would happen. We'd facilitate the exchange. We would do it all manually. Like, we did all the startup lean stuff, but ultimately we didn't think the retention was there to scale well beyond this period where you have a true need. We found that people were constantly saying, like, how do I trust this other person? Like, what do you guys do to underwrite that? And there's a lot of solutions there, obviously, as you can imagine, verification, background checks, et cetera. But what we found was that people trusted who they knew, and through who they knew. Those relationships were the commodity. They were the way to build trust. And so that was the first thing that was kind of guiding us in that direction. And I will say, I think My Place too, as a company, like they're more similar in that realm. And we thought like that their product just instinctually had more potential to scale. On top of that, we won the biggest pitch and business plan competition at UCLA. And we were a swapping platform. We had to work with the law school students to win that competition. And they basically reached out to these cities on our behalf, and they said, hey, Swapped, which was the name of our previous company. Swapped is a home swapping platform. There's no money exchange between, the two parties. There's a point system internally. There's a swap that's sometimes happening directly. We're good, right? And the city of LA and New York was like, absolutely not. If you are facilitating these stays and taking a fee, that is commercialization. That is essentially what these ordinances exist for. And that sort of piqued our interest, right? Because Gus and I are thinking, wait a second. There's tons of people posting on Instagram all the time. There's massive Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups of people publishing that they're looking for a sublet, that they are, trying to solve this problem. How come those sites are not getting regulated? And it's because they're networks. They're actually protected by Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which essentially says you have a right to publish whatever you want on the internet on a platform like Kommu's, unless it violates a federal law. So that was the aha moment of like, wait a second. There's a bigger opportunity to build this social marketplace that has massive staying power, where Chris would find more value and say, hey, whether it's a swap, a sublet with a friend of a friend, gifting your place for a weekend to a friend who didn't know that it was going to be available, that there was this huge opportunity to build this network that has tremendous staying power, and say, okay, through Chris's career, even when he's in a penthouse, I want him listing his penthouse to his friends, his 10 closest friends from Warden, and he can choose how he's going to do that. And so that ultimately was the pivot. And that was January 2022, spring 2022 is when that started to happen.
Nice. I guess marketing a business like this, what are the primary marketing channels that you're using to get the word out there and get, downloads, people signing up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge challenge. As you can imagine, like, it gets even more challenging over time. For us, initially, what we did was we had it so that you would have to invite friends to Kommu to get off the wait list and join and, try it out. The problem was really the cold start problem there, which was ultimately people would get to Kommu. They would see that they didn't have friends necessarily on the platform. There wasn't enough liquidity and availability, and they would churn very rapidly. Ultimately, what we did was we flipped it. We made it so that Kommu's experience starts open. So anybody on Kommu can join and download today, and you'll see hundreds of hosts that are listing publicly. They have their Instagrams and their LinkedIn's tied to their accounts, so you can go to these pre-existing networks and see that you probably do know this person.
Real people, yeah.
Right. In tandem with launching and rolling out groups, which we do have public and private groups that are targeting these core users, somebody like you, right? 24, 35 years old, LA, New York, SF, went to these great schools, probably has overlapping friend groups. I'm going to guess we have some mutuals, is my hypothesis. And so those two channels really started to unlock growth for us, in that we were just grabbing supply from competitors, grabbing supply from Facebook Marketplace, from Facebook groups, showing them that we can create a better value and better experience for them, and solving that booking problem. And then they would invite their friends to the platform. And we have tested the referral marketing, like we're turning that on soon. But apart from that, influencer marketing would be the only two other channels that really have been kind of where we've spent some time recently, in that we have a lot of people on Kommu using it that want to make content to basically show that they had a great experience, that this is a great platform that they want to see grow. And then I have had to do founder marketing, which is partly why, I've definitely been trying to get on more podcasts, which is to say, just telling people about what you built and reaching these broader audiences and saying, hey, this is the value we've created. We think you're going to really love it, because we do have insane retention and engagement on the platform, has been the other channel. So like my TikTok's gone viral a couple times, kind of going at Airbnb and how it's changed. And that's great. Except I don't think that that's the tenable long-term strategy for marketing and growth and acquisition. It has to be hitting these networks with these groups that already exist, and like using those go-to-market sort of motions to pull people in to Komu and expose them to it.
What going into the company, you said you've been doing it for 3 years. What would have been some of the most unforeseen challenges or stuff that just came up that you wouldn't have expected back when you were in business school?
Yeah, I mean, the first and foremost, just the downturn was brutal. I was working in VC. I knew every checkbox that you would need to check for this company to go out and raise 3 to 5 million and raise a proper seed, and then go really start to hit its mark. And that was just a brutal downturn where fundraising was not only 10x harder, like you're coming out of business school with student debt, with credit card debt. Like there was no other option other than to figure it out. And so that has been and was brutal, but it also led to some unexpected alternative opportunities that we never would have seen if it weren't for that. So one example is we are piloting our B2B model relatively soon. And in that model, we actually go directly to companies and we say, hey, company X, if your employee stays with a friend, somebody like a close friend in New York, let's say on a trip, instead of a hotel, would you pay that friend a gift of $100 a night for them not, for your employee not choosing the $500 a night hotel? Company says, as long as you handle liability and payment, that's awesome. We'd love that. And in that model, we can actually take a percentage fee of what's dispersed to host, because it's a gift. It's actually not technically a sublet. And so that, as you can imagine, is a go-to-market channel. As a business, we actually think it could be its own business and be venture scale in and of itself. And it also allows me to go sell B2B instead of having to try to have this magic moment on consumer, which is always incredibly tough to both have, scale, and then retain. I only got that because I talked to a lot of founders being like, why is it so hard to raise right now? And the founders are like, Bo, try being a Series A company that is not going to hit its next revenue targets necessarily, or might, but it needs to cut costs to actually go raise a Series B. We're in trouble if we don't figure out some ways to kind of get around this. And so that came out of the situation that we couldn't predict.
Interesting. Yeah. So many unpredictable stuff comes out of that, when you just talk to people, that it's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I guess next question is just, so in terms of monetization, what's like the monetization behind the product, or the strategy, or just thinking behind that?
Yeah. So strategically, really, it's a regulatory moat against Airbnb, right? It's to say Airbnb's got an innovator's dilemma where the Pandora's box is open. All the greed of the hosts took over. Airbnb has to sort of capitulate to these hosts because it drives $10 billion in revenue per year. And they kind of left behind this core demographic that we think is massive and can go head to head with Airbnb, that millennials and Gen Zers are just not hosting on the platform. They're getting regulated out of it. And so in our case, right, we're a Costco model. We're basically saying, you're going to pay us a small annual membership, something like $300 to $400 a year. In that membership model on the consumer side, that is where you're going to get access to wider networks, right? Friends of friends, groups, people listening to all of Kommu. If you want to use Kommu with just your friends to tell them, the cities that you're visiting, to do find my friends at the city level and to say, hey, this is when my place is available, you can. But everybody, for the most part, wants to get access to the wider networks. So it's like this weird kind of like closed access to everybody but the people model. But in that model, you do 2 nights on Airbnb, or 2 nights on Kommu per year as a host or guest, and it's break even. And everything above that is savings. And that's where we come in and we do underwrite those stays. So we're saying, to get access, you have to go through home verification, ID verification. You can accept and facilitate payments between those two users, but you cannot list your home for a profit. And so we have data and tools to actually say, this is what Chris's rent probably is, which we can talk a little bit more about. But we don't want to give away too many secrets there.
Yeah.
And then ultimately it's working with regulators and saying, like, look what happened. Airbnb got pushed out of New York. Hotels are now $600 a night on average. They're just continue to go up in price. It's just total supply and demand. There are no consumer alternatives. This is a consumer right to have somebody in your home, whether that's to recoup the sunk value or swap or pet sit, whatever. But we're all fighting that fight. These startups that are all emerging in the space, like there's a huge fight to be had. And we think we actually have the best sort of communal good out of all of this, which is empowering people to actually be able to take the trips. And so that is to say, like, that will be how we monetize the consumer business model. It will also eventually lead to regulation, but if there weren't regulation, Airbnb would just beat us out of the market once we started to scale.
Nice. What is your team look like, or how do you sort of manage your team? What are some of the roles at the current size you're at?
So that's been the funniest thing is we are just me and my co-founder Gus still. We have some part-time help. We have some interns. We have a little bit of help overseas. We are literally getting inbound from like some amazing investors and people that are like, hey, we love Kommu. We use Kommu all the time. Like, are you guys raising an A? This just happened. And we're like, we're glad you think that we're raising an A. We've been waiting for, to close out some of this earlier funding so we can turn on this business model and really get measured by that. But it's just me and my co-founder, Gus. So I handle everything non sort of technical. Gus is a full stack engineer. He is in charge of product, in charge of like customer discovery and so on. I am more on the fundraising and biz dev side, and we wear a lot of hats like every other startup founder, unfortunately, but you learn a lot that way.
Nice. Yeah. And in terms of your co-founders, how did you meet them? I think that's like a big topic for everybody is like, who's the right business partner? Do you go solo? Do you know what I'm saying? Do you team up, or how did that kind of?
Yeah. I mean, in this case, obviously, I think finding the right co-founder is one of the most important things. And then one of the biggest, like the most likely way that you will fail as a startup founder is unfortunately through co-founder conflict. And so it really is like a hard thing to do. I think a lot of people have ideas of starting companies like, the Kommu, we're not the first people to come up with this concept at all. And it really became more about how do you execute on that, and is now the right time. And so with Gus, we're in business school. I was looking for a full stack engineer. Gus happened to be one. We started talking as friends again before that. But we realized that we both agreed there was just a tremendous opportunity here, and that we don't know what we're doing. It's scary going forward and trying to do it. But again, it'd be dangerous not to. It'd be like, we'd be wondering 10 years from now why we went to, McKinsey instead of just going forward and building the, giant company that we saw so obviously in front of us. And then from there, it didn't really matter that Gus was technical. I mean, obviously there's a lot of skills that were relevant, but the truth is it was like to be able to go through these ups and downs together and to be fully in it and to like have to withstand these blows has made us essentially know now in our heart of hearts that like, it doesn't really matter where Kommu goes. We really believe it will go, up and to the right in all the categories we expect it to. But ultimately it's like, we know we can scrap, and we've been in that dogfight for a while, and not a lot of founders actually, can. A lot of them, I think, were coming out of the ZERP era. And so again, it's like we've checked off sort of the box of not going to quit unless both co-founders decide to, because we unfortunately still believe wholeheartedly in this opportunity and that it's ripe for the taking. And so we're still here 2 years later after graduation doing our jobs.
Nice.
What's your? I wouldn't know how
it
to
is
somebody else. Like I really wouldn't. Other than
yeah. What's the process? Yeah. So what are your goals? Are you trying to sell the company? Are you looking at exits? Like what are the different objectives that you have?
I hate to even say this because I'm a risk averse person by nature. I'm a B2B guy by nature. I really believe, there goes the keys. I really believe that Kommu has the scale to be a massive public company and go head to head with Airbnb. I think we're creating a new category. And it really is to say Airbnbs and short-term rentals are a massive market. Like I will still stay at Airbnbs for group travel. right? That is a $3 trillion industry. Hotels and other, lodging, massive market. There's always a time and a place for that. Weddings we're all going to weddings all over the place all the time. I'm staying at a hotel. But when you want to stay somewhere for a week or longer, when you want to be remote for a few weeks, there needs to be an asset class of primary homes. And it doesn't exist right now. And they're actually everywhere. And they're not online for a reason. They either can't be, renters like me, or they don't want to be. My parents don't want to list on Airbnb, but they would let friends stay at their place when they were gone. They would find a house sitter in that way. We centralize and build that network, and we think we are going to be the one place that you trust to share your home for the perpetuity of your life.
Yeah,
perpetuity of your life.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's a super interesting concept. Any case, Bo, where can people find you? Do you do content? What's kind of like your major platforms? How can our viewers get in touch or talk to you?
We do content. We are LA founders, unfortunately. So it's, again, has driven downloads.
TikTok and
yeah. Once we raise the millions, there will be somebody else doing the content. That being said, there's a Bo and Gus TikTok. It's at Bo & Gus GUS. Our socials are all at Go Kommu, GOKOMMU, mostly on Instagram and TikTok is where you'll find content there. The app's free in the App Store. We are just getting people to download and check it out. And I've already facilitated over 3,000 nights booked. We have 700 hosts all over the world that are just looking right now for people like your core audience that are trying to go to Lisbon, go to London, New York, wherever. And so just go check it out, and you can DM me on Kommu. I'm listing publicly in LA if you ever need a place to stay. And other than that, tune into the podcast and you'll find me.
Nice. Sounds good. Bo, thanks so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris.
Good stuff.
Storm.